Hey, this is Cold Turkey, and today we're going to be talking about the second Doctor. We are in part 3 of my 9-part series talking about old school Doctor Who. And today we're covering the second Doctor. Old school black and white, still in the black and white era. Production values are still kind of a little bit shady. The second Doctor was between November 1966 and June 1969. He played 3 seasons, specifically seasons 4, 5, and 6. He had 21 stories. In between those 21 stories, he had a total of 119 episodes. Unfortunately, 63 of those 119 episodes are missing or lost. We talked about this in my first Doctor commentary, and that is the BBC didn't really have any process for archiving any of their old television footage or storage, so they would just toss it away, chuck it in the bin, burn it, whatever. And it is really unfortunate. And this didn't even affect just Doctor Who. There were several television shows where the BBC would junk their old archives, and a lot of episodes from a lot of shows are missing because of this. But out of all that affects Doctor Who, it's unfortunately the second Doctor that got hit the hardest by this. Over half of his episodes are junked or missing. Now, I also talked in my commentary on the first Doctor that all these missing episodes have been reconstructed in some way, shape, or form. The majority of these reconstructions consist of the audio. Sometimes the audio isn't that great, it's a little grainy sometimes, and they put the audio to still images, which typically change every 3 to 6 seconds, and sort of tell the story that way. You can tell what's going on, but it's really hard to get into these missing episodes. A few of the missing episodes have been reconstructed in a much superior way. In the story The Invasion, where the Doctor fights the Cybermen, 2 of the missing episodes, within the last couple of years, have actually been animated. And then they put the audio track to the animation, they put in the 2 missing episodes, and you get all 8 of the episodes, and you can actually buy that on DVD. And I'll tell you what, that is the way to do it. Animation is top-notch, really great way to present the reconstruction of missing episodes. But when we're talking about the second Doctor, we always have to talk about the actor who played the Doctor. Well, actually that holds true to any Doctor we talk about. So let's talk about Patrick Troughton. Patrick Troughton died in 1987. He had fought in World War II, much like his predecessor. He was in the Royal Navy. He is a decorated war veteran, although I am unaware of the exact number of medals that he had and what they were called. But apparently he did quite a lot in World War II, had some close brushes with death, which is really interesting to read. He was also a very accomplished actor, and when the role of Doctor Who had come up, William Hartnell was even quoted as saying, "There's only one man in England who can take over, Patrick Troughton." So for William Hartnell, the man who had played the first Doctor, to say that about Patrick Troughton really shows you a lot about Patrick Troughton's skill as an actor, and I think it really shines through when you watch him portray Doctor Who. He's just all around solid. So who is the second Doctor? Like, what is he about? What does he represent? Well, if you recall, the first Doctor was very much a stiff upper lip kind of guy, very prim and proper, kind of old school, very wise, sort of old elderly gentleman. The second Doctor is not only younger, shorter, and he's just kind of more clownish, I guess you could say, sort of like a cosmic hobo, if you will. There's a lot of times where he just has a much better, more developed sense of humor. He can have a lot of fun with things. He can joke around with some things. He's more clever, I guess, in the way that he deals with his enemies. Sometimes he'll try to be one step ahead, whereas other times he'll play the buffoon and try to purposely deceive his adversaries into thinking he's an incompetent moron. Now, sometimes that doesn't work because they can see the intelligence in his eyes, and every now and again it actually backfires on him. But for the most part, the second Doctor really has a different personality and a different way of dealing with things than the first Doctor did. Now, once again, sometimes the Doctor can make some really tough decisions that lead to some really interesting consequences. For instance, in one of the stories, he actually manipulates one of his companions to do something, which results in the villains that he's fighting in that episode to sort of gain an advantage, even though the Doctor was trying to get the greater good out of the situation. So we can see there's always this moral dilemma. It's not necessarily clear-cut black and white, although the second Doctor has been quoted as saying, that's evil, that's wrong, we need to fight that, we need to stop that. So he definitely has, let's get out there and let's fight the powers of evil, so to speak. Now, you can probably tell by my enthusiasm that I like the second Doctor, so I'm just going to come out and say it. I'm just going to be honest. The second Doctor is my 3rd favorite Doctor of all time. And it's kind of funny to say that because the first Doctor is one of my least favorites of all time, but the second Doctor is one of my most favorites of all time. Even though it's still black and white, the production values aren't that great. What it is I think it's really just the second Doctor's personality, sort of how he does things, combined with the acting skills of Patrick Troughton, combined with the stories that were written for the second Doctor. One of the interesting things about the second Doctor is he's constantly taking on the Cybermen. If you recall, the Cybermen were actually introduced in the last story of the first Doctor, specifically his regeneration episode. So the first Doctor regenerated because of his dealings with the Cybermen, and the second Doctor, he fights the Cybermen all the time. Over 20 episodes in the second Doctor's library of episodes, several of which are missing, like we had talked about previously, are him doing battle with the Cybermen. So the Cybermen are a huge feature. Now, he still fights the Daleks, but not nearly as much as he fights the Cybermen, which is really interesting to see how they're sort of developing the villains alongside developing the Doctor. Another thing that's really interesting about the second Doctor is this is the first time we hear Time Lord, and it doesn't happen up until right until the end of the second Doctor's reign, so to speak. But right up towards the end in his last story, The War Games, we finally hear the phrase Time Lord introduced, and the second Doctor, for the first time that we see, actually has dealings with his people, the Time Lords. And this is really fascinating because if you think about it, the first 3 seasons, which William Hartnell had, nobody talks about Time Lords. And then the second Doctor, he had 3 seasons as well. But it's not until the end of the 6th season, his third, that, they talk about Time Lords and what's actually going on with his past. So that's almost 6 seasons where you don't even hear Time Lord, where you don't even hear anything about it. And once again, just to reiterate, I think that's fascinating that they're willing to play that out that long. Did they already know that he was a Time Lord? Did they have everything written down? Or were part of that 6 years them playing for time, as they themselves, the writers and the producers, were trying to figure out where the Doctor came from and what the Doctor was about? I don't know the answer because I wasn't around back in the 60s. I was born in 1981, so couldn't tell you. But it's still fascinating to look at. So, second Doctor, one of my favorite Doctors of all time. Another big reason why I really like the second Doctor, and this is something to talk about as well, is his companions. One companion in particular. The second Doctor has a companion called Jamie McCrimmon, who is this outlandish Scottish guy. he isn't with the second Doctor all the time. Technically, the first story that the second Doctor has, Jamie McCrimmon isn't there. But every story past that, every single story, from the second story to the last story. So if the second Doctor has 21 stories, 20 out of those 21 stories have this companion called Jamie McCrimmon. And Jamie McCrimmon is awesome. Now, the person who played Jamie McCrimmon, I believe it's pronounced Fraser Hines, and I could be mispronouncing that because I'm not Scottish, but I think he did an amazing job at portraying this Scottish kid, Jamie McCrimmon, and the interaction between Jamie and the Doctor is a lot of what I think sells it. It's just hilarious. They'll be joking with each other sometimes, and Jamie is constantly making jabs at the second Doctor. Oh, you're going to fly the TARDIS straight this time? You can tell my fake Scottish accent is atrocious. But it's funny to watch their interactions, and I think this is really good for Doctor Who, because whereas before, in the first Doctor, it was much more stiff upper lip. He had his granddaughter with him, and it was just a different dynamic. Whereas now we're introduced with Jamie, and Jamie has a much more comedic sort of role. Not to say that he's comedy relief by any measure. He definitely has a personality, and he has problems, he has strengths, he has weaknesses, but when you combine that with the new character of the second Doctor, this sort of joking persona where they go around as kind of this cosmic hobo, I think it really adds a lot to the show. It just makes things better, I think. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of the second Doctor. He's my third favorite Doctor of all time. Really love a lot of his episodes and what he does. Back to the whole missing stuff. Remember I was talking about how out of his 119 episodes, 63 are missing. Unfortunate that had to happen. Honestly, I want to go back in time. I want to build a TARDIS time machine right now. I want to go back in time into the 60s, and I want to find the guy who worked at the BBC who's responsible for these missing episodes, and I just want to kick him in the nuts. Boom! Oh, right in the nuts. That's what I want to do. Now, maybe that's a little harsh in hindsight. It probably is, but still, that's how passionate I feel about the subject. Old school Doctor Who really taken away from us, and it's unacceptable. you really want to watch these missing episodes. And as I had mentioned previously, you can with partial reconstructions, but it's not as the same as actually watching the episode. Although I will admit, the animated reconstructions that are done in the story Invasion are well and exceedingly above what I thought they would be. Those hit home, those dial home, those are great. But when it's just, grainy audio with a still image that changes every 5 seconds, it just doesn't have the same impact. It's much more difficult to follow and get into. You kind of find yourself nodding off, and it just pisses me off because I like the Second Doctor so much, and I feel like there's so much more I could be getting out of Doctor Who if I had these missing episodes, if they weren't missing anymore. So it kind of gets to me a little bit that had to happen, much more so than the First Doctor. The Second Doctor has many more missing episodes than the First Doctor has. But hey, at least we got partial reconstructions, so I can't complain too much. But still, I want to find that guy, kick in the nuts. But now we're going to get to the part where I go through recommendations. You're saying, gosh, Cold Turkey, I don't have a lot of money. Or maybe you just illegally download everything, so who freaking cares? And maybe you're saying, I don't want to spend too much, or I want to know what episodes to watch. Well, don't worry, Cold Turkey 49 has got your back. The first episode I'm going to recommend is Tomb of the Cybermen. It's one of the older Second Doctor stories from his first season, which is the 4th season of the show. And this is a really great episode. Very strong. I like a lot of it's just good because it explains a lot about the Cybermen and it puts the Doctor in some interesting situations. Next one I'm going to recommend is The Invasion, which is another Cybermen story. One of the great things about this Cybermen story is we see the Doctor interacting with Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. Now, Lethbridge Stewart wasn't always a brigadier, and the Doctor has had the occasional previous interaction with Lethbridge Stewart, but I think this story, which is from much later in the Second Doctor's library, really starts to establish their relationship, which is going to become very important in later Doctor Who, especially the Third Doctor, but we'll get there when we get there. So I'm going to recommend The Invasion. It's a great story. It's a story that has 2 out of the 8 episodes reconstructed with animation on the latest DVDs, which I think were made like 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know exactly when they were produced, but it's great. It's awesome. A+. And then the third and final story that I'm going to recommend is Patrick Troughton's last story, the Second Doctor's last story, The War Games. This is a very long story, like I said, 10 episodes, so, maybe watch it in 2 sittings or even 4 sittings, because, it's a lot to take in at one time. 10 episodes, assuming that each one is, let's say roughly 20-something minutes, you're looking at 4 hours. I still don't know the exact playtime of the War Games. I'm sure it's like 3 hours, 52 minutes, and 60 seconds on the nose or some BS like that. And I'm sure I'll get a letter from some rabid Doctor Who fan telling me that I should know that. But yeah, I'm going to recommend the War Games because it is awesome. It's a good episode overall. It's a bit lengthy, but it has a lot of character development and really develops Doctor Who as a whole. So those are my 3 recommendations. If you want to get into the Second Doctor, kind of like sampling a really rare wine. Old school Doctor Who. That's what the Second Doctor reminds me of. It's like I went down into my wine cellar and I'm looking for some 1967 wine or whatever, and I got a case of it and I opened the case and half the bottles are broke. And I'm like, well, what the hell? Why are all these bottles of wine broke? That's what the Second Doctor reminds me of. It's an old vintage of Doctor Who that was partially taken away, and it just makes me so mad. Kick in the nuts! But anyway, that's the Second Doctor. One of my all-time favorites. Would highly recommend you give some of those recommendations a shot. This is Cold Turkey. Thanks for watching.